Hi, I'm Sam Brake Guia and welcome to Brains Byte Back. This is the podcast that focuses on technology, psychology, and our society. In today's episode, fellow Brains Byte Back host Mags Tanev joins me to conclude her series, The New Era of Psychedelics, exploring scientific research, therapies, and the potential benefits of psychedelic compounds and plant medicines in our societies. During this series, Mags has interviewed a variety of guest speakers on topics relating to the benefits of microdosing, the healing powers of psilocybe and ayahuasca, and the current research surrounding psychedelics. In this episode, you'll learn how Mags first became interested in psychedelics, what inspired her to create this series, and what she learned from it. This episode is brought to you by Publicize, a digital PR company that grows businesses' online presence. And for a limited time only, exclusive to Brains Byte Back listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/BBB. Mags, would you be able to tell us what inspired you to produce this series?
Yeah, sure. So it was a number of things, really. I think it was a combination of paying more attention to prominent figures that are talking about psychedelics right now, that kind of have access to an audience that wouldn't necessarily be that typical psychonaut that is interested in all of the research and all of the growth that's happening in the space right now. So, people like Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, who's a huge donor to MAPS and is like a really prominent voice on psychedelic research at the moment. I think it was definitely a combination of getting more interested in what's kind of happening externally, with also becoming more interested in experimenting with some of these compounds myself. And then I think that just goes like alongside some of my friends that were also kind of keen to experiment with some of these compounds as well, and sort of seeing the benefits that they were gaining from them. So it was a mixture of different things, but I think like the main reason to sort of shine a light on this topic right now is just to remove the stigma, because I think it's at a really important point where so many people are coming around to the idea of psychedelics, especially for clinical or medicinal use, that like I said, wouldn't have previously seen them as like a legitimate treatment, for example, or a legitimate form of therapy. But especially with really renowned authors like Michael Pollan writing books on psychedelics and describing his own personal experiences with those substances, I think this is a really critical point, and anything that I can do to sort of shine a light on how powerful these compounds are, the therapeutic benefits that they have, and how the conversation is changing. Yeah, I think then that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I remember when you came to me with this and you had this idea, or at least you came to me with at least one episode, and then it seemed like you had another, and you were like, I now want to explore this, and you kind of just ran with it, and before you know it was a series rather than just like an episode or two you were doing. But I really love the fact that you came with this, and you came with so much passion, because the stuff that you were talking about and the stuff that you were looking into, I wouldn't have been able to explore this to the same extent you did. And I also wouldn't have been able to talk about it with the same knowledge that you did. So I'm really glad that like having you on the show and having you as like almost like our psychedelics correspondent has been really helpful.
Thanks, Sam. That really means a lot. And I don't want to kind of convey myself as some sort of messiah that's, had hundreds and hundreds of mystical experiences with all of these different compounds. Like, that's absolutely not the case. I'm very, very, very early in my psychedelic journey right now. I've had a handful of experiences, most recently with LSD and ayahuasca. So I'm absolutely in no place to start dishing out advice for people on how to take them and what to do beforehand and what to do afterwards. I think that's obviously why I wanted to get these experts on the show and delve into their own expertise and the advice that they have. And I also don't want to portray this series as something that's telling everyone to go out and take psychedelics right now, because there are dangers to it, and these are really, really powerful substances. And I think like definitely something that I already knew, but it's definitely been solidified with this series, is how much responsibility falls on the person taking them to make sure that they're set and setting is on point, that they're in the right mindset, that they've set the right intentions, that they have the right expectations for what they want to get out of psychedelic experiences. And I think transitioning from a mindset of purely recreational, like taking acid and mushrooms and just laughing hysterically for 6 hours and like looking at nature and feeling connected to the world, like, yeah, that's great. And that definitely has its benefits. But I think when we're talking about the real transformative power of psychedelics in terms of lasting change and helping people improve their lives and just ultimately become better people, I think that's the attention that it needs to get, because there are so many misconceptions around these drugs and these plant medicines, that it's really important that that stigma is taken away so that more and more people can have access to their many, many benefits.
Yeah, and I think you did a really good job of selecting the guests as well, because before entering this series, I did have that kind of preconception that, like, how are we going to like show this to the world? Like, we're doing a series on psychedelics. It just seemed like, even though I know who you are and I know how you'd handle this, and I had absolute confidence that you'd do a great job, and you did, it's still kind of one of those things which you're skeptical about, in the sense like you don't want to get some sort of like stereotype of being some kind of like hippie, not really head in the sand, just talking about like within your own echo chamber of like the same sort of thing. Or but like the guests that you selected, they are all like a very diverse selection, and they were all very informative and very knowledgeable. And I have to say, as someone like myself, I'm kind of on the fence with psychedelics. I'm not someone that has no experience with them, never touched them or anything like that. But at the same time, they're not something which I find myself gravitating towards or using on a frequent or regular basis at all. But I'm still very much open to the good they can do, especially since this is psychology podcast. And I got to say, one of the things that I see on psychology subreddit all the time is like the positive benefits of psychedelics and microdosing and all these things. So I think that your guest did a really good job of explaining that and breaking that down. And I'd love to know as well, like, from doing this series, what are some of your own personal highlights which you really look back on, or which you listen to now, or you can just remember now and be like, that was like a really good moment, or I'm glad I had that conversation with them, or they made a really good point there?
I think overall, like as just a general kind of highlight, I think I really liked how much the guests were willing to talk about their own experiences. And I think that was like a line that I really wanted to tread carefully, to not make it all about just talking about people's experiences, which I think you like made a good point that would just play into that idea that we're just like a bunch of hippies talking about how everyone should take LSD and like tune out, you know what I mean? But I think it was really important to make sure that I had people on the podcast who were informed about the research and who could give us some like solid evidence of the benefits, because they are like for a lot of people, those benefits are undisputable, especially when they've had their own experiences with them. But ultimately, if you're going to make these kinds of bold claims, then they need to be backed up by scientific research. So I thought that was really important, to like make sure that we had some talk of studies and different research and stuff like that on the podcast. But I think just getting the experiences from the different guests and how they've personally benefited from their psychedelic use, be it Tim talking about psilocybe and how that really helped him with his, struggles with alcoholism, be it Gaurav on the microdosing episode, who spoke about how psychedelics really helped him overcome his opiate addiction, which was like something really, really personal and amazing for him to share. And then just Jackie talking about how she said that her experiences with psychedelics have just generally made her a better person and made her want to contribute more to society, and even taken her like closer to God and closer to her own faith. So I think just like generally getting all of those stories and experiences from the guests was really important. And of course, Kat as well, with all of her experiences with ayahuasca. I think with that episode with Kat, it was a real highlight was understanding exactly what it takes to become an ayahuasquera, which is not to be confused with the shaman. Like the shaman is obviously generations of and lifetime of training and knowledge, but even just being able to pour the medicine, it took her 10 years to train with an Amazonian indigenous community to be able to simply pour the medicine in a ceremony, which is like longer than taking a medicine degree. So that was like a crazy discovery from the podcast, like just how much actually goes into it, to being able to be qualified to administer ayahuasca. I also loved talking about how the patriarchy fits into this with Jackie. I think she gave some really, really cool insights as to how she has kind of like adapted her behavior and transformed into someone that doesn't enable men to dominate the space anymore. Like she said, like she might have fallen into that trap before, but now she's very self-aware and she's aware of how dominated the psychedelic space is by men, and how necessary it is to have bigger female voices. So I thought that was a really interesting topic to dive into with her as well. And of course, Tim's stories, which are always so entertaining, especially when he's having visuals of Aztec warriors whilst trapped on a plane on acid. So that whole podcast was just a delight to record.
Yeah, Tim's stories are the best, especially when it comes to his like psychedelics, because he just gets so passionate about it and so wrapped up. And I think also it's really nice to showcase him on this podcast, just because he is like the heart and soul of The Sociable. So much of what is produced comes from his mind and his mentality, and just to get him on an episode to talk about like mushroom psilocybin, the thing that he loves more than anything in this world, I swear. Then
man, the episode was so good. It was so good. I was like, I'm so happy with that.
Yeah,
that interview. He had so much to say. I'm really glad that we got him involved as well.
Yeah. And the visuals when he talks about that kid's face and all those zits exploding like volcanoes, like he's told me that story before, but still listening to it again, it's just crazy. But at the same time, and I love the thought of him hiding under his chair, like that would have been a fantastic to be like a fly on the wall and just watch him like go through that whole airport process.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen that. Having said all of that, he did really make sure that we weren't just kind of like banging this recreational drum of like how funny and cool psychedelics can be, like, and how hilarious a trip can be, or how like terrifying a trip can be. Like he spoke a lot about the long-term benefits and the importance of set and setting, his like deep down reasons behind doing them and behind stopping doing them, and it was a very raw conversation in parts as well. So we definitely maintained that focus on like the wider picture and the transformative power of psilocybin.
Yeah, and especially for Tim, like obviously with him helping him to overcome like alcoholism in the past, that's like there's one thing that you hear about a lot. You hear about studies like they can do this or they can do that, but to actually know someone, to be friends with someone who's gone through that, it's cool to see it in real life that like, oh wow, these can actually help in this kind of capacity with something as serious as like alcoholism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you can read study after study, but when you're actually hearing it from the horse's mouth, it really hammers home just how important it is that the tide continues to change around these substances, just because of how much they can help people. In the same way that now cannabis is legal, obviously the medicinal value of that and the amount of pain that's taken away for so many people, like now that's becoming way more widely accepted. I hope that some of these substances follow a similar journey in terms of societal acceptance and just being more available for people that really need them.
Yeah. And I know you did a lot of research before this, and I know you're someone that's very clued up on this whole industry and this whole topic and area of psychedelics. But I'd be really interested to know like what you've learned from producing this series, and if there's any kind of facts or things that stick out in your mind which you feel like you're far more educated in now and more knowledgeable about after purely just from conducting these interviews for this series.
I think the main thing that I've learned, which I'm definitely going to apply on a personal level, is how much work it takes to apply and integrate the learnings that you have from a psychedelic experience. It's not a magic bullet, it's not like you're going to have one trip, take mushrooms one time, and then after that, like the next day you wake up and everything's changed. Like you have to put the work in before and after if your intention is to like get those kind of therapeutic and transformative benefits from these substances. You have to have intentions really clear. I think you have to be really true to yourself about those intentions. And it's going to take a lot of work to integrate them afterwards. And I think that's something that I knew was the case beforehand. But I think just speaking to these experts, especially speaking to Kat mainly, but also to Gaurav as well, it takes work to work out exactly what the lessons that you learned were in that experience. And it takes like motivation and discipline to integrate them. So I think that's probably the main thing that I learned from the series. And just how much and how important it is to like make sure that we're feeding into the right narrative about this. Like I said before, I don't want this podcast to be seen as something which is telling everyone to take psychedelics and not take account of the dangers of quote unquote having a bad trip, which isn't really the right way to talk about it, but the dangers that can arise if you don't have the right set and setting, if you're taking it without the right intention and without the right mindset, or if you're thinking about taking them absent-mindedly. Like, it's really important, if you're going to use them in a responsible way, treating them really seriously and with a lot of respect.
I definitely feel like I got that from Kat's interview. I got it from all of them, but like you mentioned, I think Kat's for me was the one interview where it surprised me the most. One thing which surprised me the most about all of it is the fact that she, not exactly like she was born into this or grew up anywhere near it. Like she said, she was born in Montana, and she was also diagnosed with bipolar. And then she discovered this, and now it's like been her life's quest or journey or purpose to administer ayahuasca and be so heavily involved in it. And it surprised me for a couple of reasons. One, because it's so different from what I'd imagine growing up in Montana has got to be like, if I'm remembering that correctly. And also because of the bipolar, just because I have a history of bipolar in my family. Fortunately, I've never experienced any kind of mental health issues. But I'm also very cautious of the fact that perhaps it's in there, like it's dormant, or I don't know, maybe I just not a part of my life where it's come to the surface. But so I always have this real fear that it might at some point in my life get me like it has previous members of my family. So I think that I've always been very cautious of psychedelics, especially ayahuasca in that sense. I don't know if I take it, I don't know what's going to happen. And everyone that I speak to says that it's an experience completely different from anything else you can compare. So for me, it's just such a step into the unknown that it's kind of quite scary and intimidating. But having spoken with her, or at least having listened to the podcast you did with her, it was very inspiring to hear that it wasn't a risk to her. If anything, doing ayahuasca sounded almost like a remedy or a cure. And it was quite contrary to like what I had preconceived before listening to that episode. And plus, she's someone that clearly has a lot of experience in this, in ayahuasca. So she's definitely someone that I feel like I could trust and understand, knows what she's talking about when she talks about this. So I definitely say that episode with Kat is one of the highlights for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. So did that episode make you think more about potentially trying it?
Yeah, I think so. I think as well, a part of that episode that really stayed with me was the fact that both of you kind of said that you were stepping into the unknown. Because like I always see it as ayahuasca as being something where when you're ready, you kind of don't have any doubts or don't have any fear, you just go for it. Whereas I think for me, because it's one so unknown and so, yeah, just uncharted for me. So I think that it was something that seemed so kind of, yeah, just so uncertain to me. But then hearing that like both you and Kat said like, oh, you're never going to be fully ready or you're never going to be fully certain, like just taking it the first time or taking it any time is always a step into the unknown. But you have to take that step of bravery. It's like that leap of faith. And that's what's necessary. So I suppose for me, I always had this idea that at some point there would be no ambiguity. It would just be like, right, this is it. This is without doubt. This is when I got to do it and how I got to do it. But listening to both of you, it's clear that it's not that clean cut and that there is some form of like faith that's involved just by taking it and yeah, just taking that plunge really.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's important to like not equate feeling like the medicine is calling you with feeling 100% ready and fearless for whatever comes at you, because anyone that like goes into an ayahuasca ceremony with no fears and no nerves whatsoever, like I don't think they're telling you the truth.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was super scared the first time I took it, and like the subsequent 3 times that I took it after that. So I think like waiting for the moment of no fear and being 100% ready, like that's probably never going to come for the majority of people. So yeah, that's interesting that it had that effect on you.
Yeah. And also, hey, who knows? Once this quarantine's all over, and maybe once retreats or whatever they are become available again, maybe you can take me.
Yeah,
Like
I
I
would know.
thought.
I keep thinking how like overloaded with people the first ceremonies back are going to be, because there are people like here, like around Medellin, that go to these ceremonies like every single week or every 2 weeks. Like you see them again and again at the same ceremonies. So I can't imagine what they're going through right now if they're not able to go. Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll book out some time. I'm not in a huge rush, but like, yeah, we'll get to it when it's ready.
Yeah, exactly. There's really no rush.
How
It will always be there.
you also, one thing that I liked as well is you also discussed psychedelics during quarantine. So that for me is something that we kind of like discussed beforehand. Like I remember you and I, or at least in a chat, we were discussing about like the pros and cons of like what it would be like to take psilocybin during a quarantine, since you're like trapped indoors, or you can't really go out, you don't have the luxury, or unless you live in nature, you don't really have the luxury of just like leaving your home and going out into nature. And it was quite funny because like all your guests that you posed this question to had somewhat of a different answer, and they kind of discussed it. I especially like Gaurav, his the similarity he drew between an ayahuasca ceremony and quarantine. Even though I can't really relate, having never been to an ayahuasca ceremony, it was quite a funny comparison that he made. But I'd love to know, like, if you're open to chatting with us, like, have you had any experiences so far in quarantine that you'd like to share with us?
Well, Sam, funny that you ask. So yeah, at the time of recording, which is the 18th of May, though not the weekend just gone, but the weekend before that, I did take a tab of LSD with my boyfriend whilst self-isolating in his apartment, just the two of us. And honestly, we had like an, on the whole, extremely positive and insightful experience. It was very intense. It was definitely like a real journey, as all LSD trips are. But in terms of doing it in quarantine, I don't think that that hampered anything or like set a dark tone. And I think that was basically because we knew, like going into it, we knew like what our conditions were and that we weren't going to leave the apartment. It wasn't like something that was thrust upon us in the middle of the trip, or it wasn't like Tim, who was still tripping when he had to get on a plane and he thought he'd be out of it by then. And we were really comfortable. Like there wasn't anyone else around. Wasn't anyone that we had to deal with or anything that we had to think about or do. We were just able to ride it out for as long as it lasted. And obviously it was different to taking LSD in nature, which is the only way I'd done it before that. But it was different in a good way. Like we were still able to look at really cool stuff, especially because he lives like on the 11th floor. So we could like look out at the mountains around Medellin, and there was like some really cool like storms like happening in the distance, and like the sunset and stuff. It was there was a lot of cool stuff to look at, but it was also like an experience of all the senses, to be honest. So like we were listening to some really great music, we were eating some really delicious mango. Like it was really cool. And it was, I wouldn't say it was like one of those like life transforming experiences where you come out of it and you have like all of these new lessons, but I think definitely is something to do as a couple if you're like 100% ready for it, which we felt that we were. Yeah, it was great. So like again, if people are still in isolation whilst listening to this, definitely not advising to take acid like in an apartment that you can't leave. But for us, like it worked really well, and I'm just really happy that we did it.
Yeah, I'm glad it went well as well, and I'm kind of glad you tried it out because obviously you were like contemplating the idea, and I was really curious to see how it would go for you. So now I'm happy that you did it and it went well, and all around good feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. But again, not recommending other people to do the same.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be doing it, but it's still good to hear that it went well for you. But like kind of going back a bit further with your experiences, how did you first get into psychedelics, and how did this interest kind of like flourish into what it is now?
So it's been kind of a long process. I first took psychedelics when I was in the second year of uni with some friends. We took some mushrooms, and I remember it really, really clearly because it was one of those trips that was just like turned around like purely through the power of just willing yourself not to have a bad, quote unquote, bad trip. So I remember that my friends were all waiting for me to arrive at my friend's place where they were eating the mushrooms. So I got there and they were like rushing because they wanted to like eat them quickly. So I didn't really like question anything. One of my friends gave me this kind of like handful of mushrooms that they'd ordered online, and I just ate all of them. And then like a few minutes later, I like find the leaflet that came with the delivery, and it has all of the different types of mushrooms like listed, and then it's got all of the different like ratings of how strong they are on different things next to them. And I remember asking my friend which ones he'd given me, and he'd said the name of them. And then I like look at the name of this mushroom on this leaflet, and it says, if it's your first time eating them, take no more than 2 to 3 grams. And I was like, said to my friend, like, how much did you just give me? And he was like, well, like it's a 15-gram bag between 2, so 7.5 grams. And I was like, what? And obviously there's nothing you can do like at that point, like they're in you, and like
Yeah.
they started to kick in. I was the only one that was freaking out because no one else had like had this realization that they'd just been fed 7.5 grams of mushrooms. So I started feeling really, really anxious. Like obviously this was my first time like ingesting any form of psychedelic. I had no idea. I had no idea like if there was anything I should do, or like I like had no idea that it's really a mental game and you just have to just turn it around in your own head, I guess. So I was feeling super anxious. I really didn't want to leave the house, but they were all going out, like they were going to the park. And then I was like wondering what I should do. And I was like, no, I should just go with them. Like if I stay here alone, that'll be even worse. So like we leave the house, and it was honestly like I'd stepped into another universe. Like, I don't know if you've seen that film with, what's his name?
Is it Avatar?
With with Bradley Cooper, Limitless, where he takes the pill and everything gets brighter, like his vision gets better. So like we'd been inside this like dingy student house. Sorry, friends who lived in that house, but that's what it was. And we stepped outside, and it was a beautiful day, and everything. It was like I'd just taken that pill that Bradley Cooper takes in Limitless. Like everything was HD, the colors were so bright. I remember my friend had orange hair at the time, and her hair was like super, super bright. So it just the environment, everyone else was laughing so much. And like, I just kind of like started laughing in like this like anxious way, and then basically just didn't stop for about 6 hours, and then just turned it around completely. Like we went to the park and had a great time playing with earthworms and stuff. So that was my first psychedelic experience. But then I didn't have another one after that until trying out DMT, which was probably like almost 2 years ago. So that was like a big gap. But I think since coming to Colombia, like the interest has renewed, not necessarily just because I'm in Colombia, but mainly just like the people that I've been surrounding myself with here, like mutual friends of ours, like are also really interested in exploring psychedelics and their benefits and having these different types of experiences. So it's been like a gradual thing, and it's definitely been one that I've dipped my toes into rather than diving in head first. And I would still consider myself like a complete novice when it comes to all psychedelics, but it's definitely like something that I'm really excited to explore further in a responsible and well-intentioned way.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And I gotta say, you're absolutely right. It's not good to dive in head first. I mean, admittedly, like you kind of unintentionally did that anyway with the mushrooms on your first time. But obviously, like when you're relying on other people to like sort out your doses, if it's something new to you, then that's one of those things where it's just gonna happen, I suppose. Or you don't know what you're getting. And I completely understand, no judgment here, because as you know, and we discussed this story before, like the first time I took acid was at Burning Man, and I took way, way, way too much and ended up in a psychiatric tent. So I definitely know what it's like to dive in head first. And I would say like when it comes to psychedelics, for sure, just don't screw it up. Just be cautious. Don't dive in head first.
Yeah, just don't do it mindlessly. Like really think about it and think about what you want to get out of it, and don't see it as something that's purely recreational. As fun as it can be to laugh hysterically for hours on end, like there are deeper reasons to explore these substances as well. So I think as long as you're, in a safe place with people that you trust, then I think, those are the main things. And there's obviously the whole issue of legality as well, but I guess that depends where you are in the world and the ways in which you want to take it.
Yeah. And my last question to you, the one last thing that I wanted to discuss with you, and we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, is I'd love to hear more about your first experience with ayahuasca and how your relationship with it has developed and progressed since that first experience.
Yeah, so I think my relationship with ayahuasca is definitely an example of me dipping my toes in before feeling confident enough to like fully dive into having a really, really intense experience. So my first experience with ayahuasca was just one ceremony, about an hour outside of Medellin. And I was super nervous, but I was with like some really good friends. So that like obviously really helped. and with friends that had taken it before in that place. So I trusted the place that we were going to, and I trusted my friends that I was with, but I was still really, really nervous. And they give you the option of having like a beginner's cup or having a full cup. And because I was super nervous, I had the beginner's cup. And it was honestly like, it was pretty chill. That was the option to get up and have more. But like in that state, I think with ayahuasca, or with jahe, I should say, because technically it's the same like plants and roots that are used to make the brew, but it's made in a different way. So with jahe, which is the Colombian version of ayahuasca, basically, I feel like it always takes me up to the point at which it knows I can handle, and it doesn't push me any further. And I feel like that's the medicine understanding how much I can take and the kind of intensity that I'm like, that's at my maximum. I wouldn't even call it comfort level because it's not comfortable at all, but I definitely haven't had any of these crazy experiences that other people talk about of like going to different dimensions, losing all sense of self, and having these really, really tough experiences as well, which can feel really, really dark and really anxiety inducing. I feel like my experiences with ayahuasca, including the first one, have like generally been very, very beneficial. Like I've learned some important lessons, but I haven't had something that's like absolutely blown my head off like other people have kind of felt the morning after. And I think part of the reason for that is that A, I don't take a big dose, and B, that I don't feel like I've ever had like a true connection with my intentions that I've set before a ceremony. And I think that comes down to never really truly having a solid reason or a solid understanding of exactly why I wanted to take it, which kind of goes against like what I'm saying with this podcast, which is like have a reason and know why you want to do it. But I just knew that I wanted to do it. But then I found that I was kind of like making the decision, and then after that searching for the reason, where like you should be driven to it for a certain, I mean, I don't know. It's like, this is again something that I'm like not qualified to really speak on with any form of authority. I'm obviously just speaking from my own experience, and I can speculate all day as to why I haven't had a certain intensity of experience with the plant. But I think that like clarity on intention definitely comes into it. So I would say I still have a long way to go with jahe, and every experience is different. And even the ones where you feel like you didn't really go deep, or you didn't really scratch the surface of what was possible, there are still definite benefits to it, and there are still definite lessons to learn, even if it's just the way that you feel the week after, which is like honestly amazing in all senses, like mentally, in terms of like mental clarity, productivity, like physical energy, like just mood and compassion levels are like definitely increased like after a ceremony. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I feel like I'm just still got a long way to go and still got a lot to learn.
Still, like, even though admittedly, yeah, you're not on the same level as Kat, as far as your average Joe on the street goes, you definitely know more and have more experience than most people. Like for me, for example, like I have no experience, I've never taken it, but I would still turn to you and look to you as someone who has knowledge in this subject. Even if you are not the most knowledgeable, you're still someone that has more knowledge than the majority of people that I would speak to, just because you have these experiences. And I do get what you're saying, because like I see you afterwards, like we work together and you'll come to the office, or I'll see you the following week, and I do hear like you're happy, you're generally, you get something from this. So even if you're not sure exactly what it is that you're going to get from this, every time you do seem to walk away with something. And like you said, those elevated levels of happiness and kind of like compassion, whatever you get from it, you're getting something, obviously.
Yeah, but in terms of like long-term lasting change, like that's going to come from integrating the lessons that the medicine teaches you. So yeah, I think those are the goals that I have with the plant medicine. Well, I guess when we get out of isolation, let's see.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, again, I just want to say thanks for doing the series. I really enjoyed it. It was a really fun addition, and hopefully we'll get you on some other subjects you're passionate about, and get you on for more series and more episodes, because yeah, it's always great to hear the passion that you bring into the podcast when there's subjects which I'm just like, I got no idea about this. So
thank you so much, Sam. It's been so much fun hosting the episodes, and yeah, there'll be many more to come for sure.
Awesome. Once again, thank you to our sponsor Publicize. Visit their website if you want to find out more about their PR for growth packages, their free resources, or even schedule a call. And for a limited time only, exclusive to Brains Byte Back listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/BBB. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. You can find more episodes just like this at sociable.co. You can also find many articles that we produce on there as well. And you can follow us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. And we love hearing what you think, so tweet at us at The Sociable. That's the show. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.